faithfully delivering value by interpreting the world's best books. Hi, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'm diving into the book, The World of the Middle Ages. The subtitle is From the Fall of the Western Roman Empire to the Rise of the Tudor Dynasty. The author is Anita Baker, a British historian and medieval expert. What do you know about Europe's Middle Ages, and how do you view this 1,000-plus-year period? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Mention the Middle Ages, and many folks picture it with negative labels like dark, ignorant, brutal, and backward. No surprise there, since people often describe it as an era of restricted thinking, halted progress, and tough living. Over time, it's been painted negatively, which is really an oversimplification, even stigmatizing. From the 5th to 15th century, this 1,000-year span had its dark hours, but also calm, stable times. Tech progress was slow, sure, but inventions like the printing press, clocks, and glasses emerged. Life was harsh with wars, famines, and plagues claiming lives, yet kinship, faith, and art brought comfort. It wasn't humanity's finest hour, but it wasn't all darkness either. It's multidimensional and complex. Today's book, The World of the Middle Ages, paints a vivid panorama across history, daily life, and culture, letting us explore this distant yet fascinating era. I'll cover this book in 3 sections. First, the time frame and historical outline of the Middle Ages. Second, medieval feudalism and everyday living. Third, religious faith and cultural arts in the Middle Ages. Starting with part 1, the time frame and historical flow of the Middle Ages. First, the time frame. Why do historians mark 476 AD as the start of the Middle Ages? Because that's when the Western Roman Empire fell to Germanic tribes. After that, Germanic tribes established various kingdoms in Western Europe, often called Germanic realms. Europe lacked a central power, leading to fragmentation. The Middle Ages concluded in 1453. That year saw the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire. Then came the Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment, transforming medieval mindsets and ways of life. So, geographically speaking, it broadly covers all of Europe, but historians usually focus on Western Europe, like Spain, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, and the UK. For instance, their medieval traits really stand out. Feudalism was everywhere, Catholicism was key, and guilds ran the show in cities. Oh, and Western Europe wasn't closed off. It had strong ties with its neighbors. So when historians discuss it, they inevitably cover Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and even Asia. Putting it all together, that's how we can understand the regions bordering Europe. All right, the time and space of the Middle Ages. Spatially, Western Europe was the core, spreading across all of Europe. Time-wise, it spanned from the mid-400s to the 1400s, roughly 1,000 years. Now, let's get into the historical flow, focusing on 4 key events. First up, the rise and split of the Frankish kingdom. Back in 476 AD, Germanic tribes conquered the Western Roman Empire. After that, Western Europe got overrun by all sorts of Germanic tribes, fighting each other and plunging into chaos. During all this, there was this Germanic group in what's now northeast France. The Franks set up the Frankish kingdom, and it grew big time. By 768, when Charlemagne took over, they ruled most of Western Europe and pushed into Eastern Europe. It looked like the Frankish kingdom was going to unify Europe. But hey, good things don't last. After Charlemagne died, his sons fought a civil war and split the kingdom into West, Middle, and East. The West part became the Kingdom of France. The East part turned into the Kingdom of Germany, covering Austria, Switzerland, and Midwest Germany. And the Frankish kingdom stretched from the Netherlands down to northern Italy. It's bad luck? It was long and skinny, stuck between 2 big powers, so France and Germany carved it up along the Rhine. Gotta point out, you can't just think of the Kingdom of France as modern France or the Kingdom of Germany as today's Germany. Yeah, they had kings, but under them were feudal lords running their own shows. Admin, money, courts. Ah, Kings couldn't meddle, so the king was mostly a figurehead with tiny control. And that brings us to part two, Germany's fragmentation. Germany's history had some big shot rulers, like Otto I back in the mid-900s. He played politics like a pro, cracked down on feudal lords, and teamed up with the Catholic Church to become Holy Roman Emperor. Rome claimed its legitimacy derived from the Roman Empire, with historical continuity. Adding holy signified divine right and supreme authority, bringing German monarchy to its peak. But this reliance on personal prowess didn't last. After Otto I's death, German royal power gradually weakened, and feudal lords regained dominance. In the mid-13th century, the seven most powerful feudal lords agreed to jointly elect the German king. These seven were called the electors, effectively splitting Germany's highest authority, HHPR. By the late Middle Ages, the German kingdom had fragmented into numerous principalities of varying sizes. The so-called Holy Roman Emperor was theoretically emperor of all Germans, but he only exercised real control over his own fiefdom. The title had become hollow. So that was Germany. Now, what about France to the west? This brings us to the third event, the 100 Years' War. France was originally just a geographic term. In northern France, the valley between the Seine and Loire rivers, including cities like Paris and Orleans, was collectively called France. In 987 AD, Hugh Capet, Duke of France, was elected king by Frankish nobles, founding the Kingdom of France. The French king's actual domain covered only Paris and its surroundings, less than a tenth of modern France. Elsewhere, feudal lords nominally obeyed but operated independently. And for a long time, the king couldn't even collect taxes and resorted to highway robbery to ease financial woes. However, French royal authority demonstrated stronger willpower and execution than its German counterpart. Successive French kings patiently expanded through marriages, gradual annexations, and conquests. By the 14th century, France neared unification until an obstacle emerged. What's England got to do with this? Here's the story. In northern France lay the Duchy of Normandy. In 1066, William, Duke of Normandy, crossed the English Channel and conquered England. Thus, William and his heirs became both kings of England and dukes of Normandy, but the French king's drive to unify France put Normandy in direct conflict with English interests. From 1337 to 1453, England fought the prolonged 100 Years' War. During this, French national consciousness awakened, unleashing fierce resistance that drove English forces into retreat. In 1453, the two nations signed a treaty. England withdrew from the European continent, and France achieved unification. Coincidentally, a fourth major event happened that same year. The grand finale of the Middle Ages was the fall of the Byzantine Empire, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire. After the Western Roman Empire fell, it claimed to be the sole heir of the Roman Empire. But Western European nations didn't recognize its legitimacy. Its core territory was confined to Greece and the Balkans in southern Europe, though at its peak it held Spain, Egypt, and much of modern Turkey. But over time, the Byzantine Empire declined, especially facing the aggressive Ottoman Empire, and its territory kept shrinking. By the early 15th century, only its capital, Constantinople, remained. In 1453 AD, the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople, renaming it Istanbul. The Byzantine Empire exited the stage of history. As the legacy of Rome, its fall shattered Europeans' dream of recreating a powerful central government ruling all of Europe. This liberated thinking and cleared the path for the Renaissance. Quote, end of Susan. In this sense, we say the fall of Constantinople in 1453 marks the end of the Middle Ages. However, this book's author pushes the endpoint to 1485 with England's Tudor dynasty, arguing it ended civil wars and set England toward prosperity, a distinctly British perspective. Thankfully, either way, The Middle Ages lasted about 1,000 years, which doesn't hinder understanding its historical flow. That's the overview. Next, I'll take you inside the Middle Ages to explore feudalism and daily life. Feudalism was the most fundamental feature of medieval society. All activities of medieval people, from major military political events to daily routines, unfolded within feudalism. Feudalism originated in the early 8th century. Charles Martel, the de facto ruler of the Frankish kingdom, implemented the fief system. Specifically, the king granted land to vassals, allowing them to govern their own territories. The king didn't interfere. These land-holding vassals became feudal lords. In return, they swore loyalty to the king and fulfilled obligations like regular tribute and military service. Major lords would subdivide land to minor lords, who also had to fulfill obligations. Minor lords could further subdivide land, thus creating their own vassals. Theoretically, land could be divided infinitely, forming a hierarchy of kings and major lords, minor lords and lesser lords, a pyramid structure where subordinates only owed duties to their direct superiors, not higher authorities. In other words, major lords pledged loyalty to the king, minor lords to major lords, but minor lords had no duty to the king. This was called, "My lord's lord is not my lord." Thus, medieval kings had fairly limited power. While 17th century French king Louis XV could declare, "I am the state," no medieval king would dare claim such authority. Kings and feudal lords formed the ruling class, while dependent peasants comprised the ruled, receiving land to farm lifelong, surrendering most harvest to sustain their lords. Peasants had no personal freedom. Leaving the manor required lords' permission, as did marriages and funerals. Compared to lords, peasants' living standards were vastly inferior. Take food. Lords ate fine, tasty white bread made from wheat. Peasants, only coarse, cheap bread from rye and barley. Same with soup. Lords had pea, bean, cabbage, leek soups with beef and fish. Peasants got vegetable-only soups, nearly meatless. For most peasants, chewing rye bread with thin soup was a feast. And alcohol differed too. Lords drank wine, peasants got cheap ale or beer. Medieval folks drank alcohol like water, since actual water tasted foul, leading to widespread alcoholism. Only in the late Middle Ages, when tea spread and tasted better, did alcoholism ease significantly. Between lords and peasants stood a unique class, burghers, special because they held no fiefs, weren't rulers, yet enjoyed more independence than peasants. Many medieval cities were autonomous towns. By pledging loyalty to the king, they kept political, financial freedom, self-governing without feudal ties. Cities like Hamburg, Cologne, Bremen in northern Germany, and Venice, Turin, Milan in northern Italy were all autonomous. But how did they maintain autonomy? The answer is trade.
For example, Venice's trade stretched from the Mediterranean to Africa and Asia, making it the era's international hub and Europe's wealthiest city. Wealth improved citizens' lives beyond peasants, and by the late Middle Ages, urban elites far surpassed feudal lords.
Like Florence's Medici family, who dominated European finance, reportedly richer than nations, while heavily funding the arts. Some historians argue the Renaissance was essentially bankrolled by the Medicis. Of course, ordinary citizens couldn't indulge like the wealthy. Their freedom had limits. Medieval cities all had guilds. Masons, blacksmiths, tailors, bakers, jewelers all joined relevant guilds under strict oversight. Price hikes or shoddy goods meant penalties. We've now covered medieval society's three main groups: feudal lords, peasants, and burghers. Clearly, they differed vastly in status, wealth, and living standards. Overall, peasants, the majority, fared worst, but fate was impartial in one way. In one measure, lords, burghers, and peasants were similar. Lifespan. Statistically, medieval life expectancy was just 40 years. Reaching 60 was considered long-lived. Low life expectancy had three main causes: high mortality among young women and infants, primarily due to childbirth. Without modern medicine or effective midwifery, medieval childbirth was like facing death's door. Many young mothers died in childbirth. Infants often perished, and survivors might succumb to illness or malnutrition. Data shows medieval child mortality under 7 was at least 20%, up to 35%. Surviving to adulthood was sheer luck. Second factor, poor health compounded by worse medical practices. Though lords ate better than peasants, by modern standards their diet lacked protein, vitamins, and minerals, so health remained poor. Ineffective medicine made it worse. But now, I hope on this. The medieval go-to cure was bloodletting. For any ailment, doctors cut veins to drain blood, often causing fatal blood loss. Believe it or not, medieval surgeries were often performed by barbers, who doubled as doctors, using unsterilized razors as scalpels. Many died during operations, so folks often chose to leave illnesses to fate. Next, let's cover what dragged life expectancy down. The third factor, natural disasters and human calamities, famine, plague, and war. Peasants relied on weather. Droughts, floods, or pests meant crop failures and starvation. In the early 1300s, the Little Ice Age hit, longer winters, cooler summers, causing crop failures across Europe. Famine pushed mortality over 10%, just as famine eased, an even deadlier crisis struck.
The Black Death, bubonic plague, spread from the Middle East via trade routes to Italy, then ravaged Europe, killing thousands daily.
An estimated 25 million died, 1/3 of Europe's population, with France hit hardest. The plague arrived mid-Hundred Years' War between England and France. Plague plus war left fields barren, towns ruined, and people displaced. In spring 1358, northern French peasants revolted, storming castles, burning contracts, killing hundreds of lords. Nobles crushed them, massacring 20,000. Rebel, and you die. Don't rebel and you die. Survival was near impossible for common folk. So yeah, calling the Middle Ages dark isn't entirely wrong. Reality was that grim. But what about spiritual life? Part 3 takes us into medieval minds, exploring faith, culture, and arts. First, religion, the cornerstone of medieval spirituality. From birth to death, Europeans lived through Christianity, baptized at birth, belonging to local parishes. They prayed before meals and sleep, attended Mass, confessed sins. Priests officiated coming-of-age rites, weddings, funerals, even holidays like Carnival. Easter came from Christianity. Calendars followed Rome's decrees. They also paid tithes, 10% of income to the church, its main revenue source. If he was the child of a feudal lord or wealthy citizen, he'd usually enter a monastery for schooling. Why monasteries? Because medieval times didn't have modern schools, so preserving knowledge fell to monasteries. For monasteries, local nobles were big donors. Educating their kids was a form of payback. On the flip side, noble families would appoint some children as clergy to tighten bonds with the church. So, most medieval bishops and popes came from wealthy, powerful families. These folks didn't lead quiet, monkish lives. Instead, they often meddled in worldly affairs, grabbing benefits for the church, their kin, and themselves. Take Gregory I. Born into a powerful Roman family, served as city prefect in his youth, then became a monk, rising to abbot and cardinal. Elected pope in 590, Gregory I's biggest wins were boosting church assets and expanding church power. First, on growing church assets, specifically by building monasteries all over. Since monastery lands belonged to the church, over time, it became Western Europe's biggest landowner. Gregory I had a sharp business mind. He had monasteries lease land to peasants, collecting rent while selling grain and wine for profit. This was basically running monasteries like companies. Now on to expanding church power. In 597 AD, Gregory I sent a mission to England to convert its Anglo-Saxon rulers to Christianity. This marked Christianity's spread across Western Europe, boosting church power to rival royal authority. The church also held a trump card. Medieval kings had to be crowned by their bishop, who obeyed Rome. If a king wanted to become emperor, like the German king aiming for Holy Roman Emperor, it needed the Pope's personal grant. This meant royal legitimacy came from church authority, legally putting church power above the crown. Naturally, royal power resented this and tried to dominate church power, sparking crown-clergy conflicts. But in the highly religious Middle Ages, church power always won out, and its influence soaked into every corner of culture and arts. Take painting, for example. Whether oil, fresco, or mosaic, themes mostly came from the Bible, spreading Christian teachings through biblical stories. Like frescoes emerging in 13th century Italy, artists dissolved slaked lime in water to create paint, then worked directly on church walls. These works featured fine textures, rich colors, and high artistry, profoundly inspiring later generations of artists. Renaissance masters like Michelangelo and Raphael were fresco virtuosos. Music, too, was steeped in religious atmosphere. The most popular medieval music was liturgical chant during worship services. Early chants had simple melodies but evolved complex harmonies and polyphony, revolutionizing music history and paving the way for classical music. Medieval literature also carried strong religious themes. Spain's Song of the Cid and France's Song of Roland promoted chivalry, urging devotion to God's glory. Folklore spawned many religious legends, too, like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. But Christianity didn't monopolize medieval minds. Monasteries actually preserved numerous ancient Greek texts. Roman-era works covered literature, philosophy, history, politics, astronomy, medicine, math, chemistry, physics, everything. They'd just been neglected for ages. Arabs, however, treasured these works, studied them earnestly, and achieved brilliance in many fields. This ironically spurred Europeans to rediscover and organize ancient texts. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle received deep study during the Middle Ages. With printing presses spreading, these ideas circulated rapidly, fueling the Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment. And speaking of printing presses, that was a medieval invention. In 1455, German inventor Johannes Gutenberg built Europe's first movable type press and printed Bibles with it. The book's author notes, Gutenberg's press massively accelerated information flow, paving the way for mass education and enlightenment. Also, eyeglasses, mechanical clocks, and cannons were born in the Middle Ages. This shows that science and technology kept developing during the Middle Ages. In that sense, Europe's Middle Ages weren't just about superstition and ignorance. They fostered science and reason, becoming the starting point for moving toward a modern society led by rationality. And what do you think about this? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. All right, we've covered the world of the Middle Ages, from the fall of the Western Roman Empire to the rise of the Tudor dynasty. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.